Hey everyone, welcome back to Make It Happen Mondays, where we talk about sales, business, entrepreneurship, personal growth, mental health, and everything in between with guests who I truly respect and I think make a positive impact on the world around us. And today's conversation is with Will Barron. Now, Will and I go back a long time ago. I think I was actually on his podcast 10 years ago when he was coming up. And his mission is to turn traditional sales training on its head and make things simple. He has a hit show, salesman.com podcast, which is the world's most downloaded sales podcast, apparently. Has been awarded the title of New and Noteworthy and by Apple and gets over 700,000 downloads a month. Holy shit. And his flagship Salesman Academy training program has over 2,000 students and generates a ton of revenue for them. So, like I said, it's been about 10 years since Will and I talked, and he was one of those ones coming out with a podcast and a sales podcast before most people were. And he's a student of the game. And I wanted to have this conversation with him to see how things have evolved from his perspective and where sales is going, what he's seeing out there, because he definitely is there on the ground floor. Kind of like me, still selling every day, but really trying to deal with real world problems, not, the superficial crap, which we're both sick of seeing on LinkedIn, all these people who are quote unquote influencers and spraying crap that we know doesn't work or worked in an easier time when money was free, and now is just actually putting sales reps in a bad position. So we went through a bunch of stuff. His background's really interesting. It's very similar to mine. Nondescript, no real major pain, no real major trauma. We talk about that and how you develop grit without trauma, first of all. Then about the fundamentals and how we're skipping those fundamentals. Now we need to get back to them, but what do fundamentals mean in this new world of sales with AI and everything else? Talked a lot about how we just need to flip to the buying process and forget about the selling process. Again, sales at its core is a service industry. We are here to service the client. We are here to help people solve problems and achieve goals. And if you're trying to convince people otherwise, then I think you're doing it wrong. And Will shares a very similar mentality as I do. Talked about one thing that is really piquing my interest right now, which is, the bad sales techniques and trainers out there, or at least the ones I think are bad. And do the means justify the ends, right? Like if it is a good product ultimately that is going to help somebody in some form or fashion, doesn't matter how sleazy you are to convince them to get that. I think that's where a lot of sales reps these days are justifying their actions. And we dove into that and what that actually means. And then talked about his frameworks. He has a book called 15 Proven Step-by-Step Frameworks, or the book's actually called Selling Made Simple. And he gives frameworks. And then he's also got a sales code book about 18 sales skills. So we dove into those as well. So this one's all sales all the time. Super interesting conversation. Hopefully it'll get you to think and start to understand, again, the essence of sales and get back to what makes this profession so great. So I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Let's make it happen. Will Barron, welcome to the Make It Happen Monday podcast, my friend. It has been a minute. How are you?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you, John. You were one of I think you, within the first 100 episodes of people that I interviewed on my show, yep, many years ago. So
I was trying to think of how long ago that was. Do you remember when that was? Because I think it was like legit, like 10 years ago. I was trying to wrap my head around it.
I'll find out. You can put it in the show notes, perhaps.
Yeah.
But when I run a sales training company at salesman.com. First time I interviewed you, I was just doing the podcast. I had no intention of doing any sales training whatsoever. It was just, how can I learn how to improve my sales skills and do it publicly so other people can learn on the back of it as well. Mm-hmm. So I'm very grateful and humbled and honored to be on your platform.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here, man. I mean, I think that you have the same mentality as far as why I started the podcast. It was actually from selfish purposes, so I could learn, right? Because I don't really learn by reading books or going to courses or any of that stuff. I learn by talking to people who are smarter than me. And so it's really just been an avenue for me to engage and learn. So I appreciate you coming on, and I'm really interested in kind of your story and your journey over the years since we talked the first time, and kind of your perception of what's going on today in sales compared to what was. But before we get there, give the audience a little bit of background here. And when I talk about background, I don't mean just the stuff that we can learn on LinkedIn about you. Like, go back to growing up, like parents, like where'd you get the entrepreneurial itch, if you will? I mean, didn't you study chemistry or something like that? Mm-hmm. Wasn't that your degree? So, yep. So walk me through kind of like how you grew up, what your parents had influence, and then kind of get us through why you chose college and chemistry, and then how you fell into sales just like everybody else. So give us that context.
I love that. I absolutely love it because I chose it as my first job out of university, but we can get to that. So I purposely leaned that direction as I was falling into it.
Okay.
But I grew up in a very wonderful yet average kind of low middle class family here in the UK. Wasn't given anything. There was no kind of pot of cash at the end of any rainbows. Mum and dad worked really hard. Mum was a pharmacy technician. She passed away now. She had cancer. My dad was started off as a tool maker in industry. Then he ran his own business on the back of that later on before he retired. And now he has like a handful of property, which is his pension. So very normal, which I see as sometimes it's for my happiness and sanity and emotional kind of well-being, it's very much a positive thing. But from a competitive edge, it could also not be seen as such a positive. I find for the people that I've interviewed on my podcast, the people who are the ultra elite, which I don't particularly aspire to be. I want to be pretty good, make a load of money in sales, and then retire early, as we were just talking about pre-recorded. Maybe we can get to some of that. I don't think you need to be ultra elite. I think you need to just be able to get your head down and do the job. And that's what I've been wired to do over the years. Yeah. So I think most of the ultra elite people I've engaged with over the years have some kind of trauma. There's some kind of incident, there's some kind of issue which led them to giving the world an FU or fighting back or do something along those lines. I, from a happiness standpoint, I guess, didn't go through any of that. Lovely childhood, lovely family, 2 brothers. Mum passed away of cancer. That is what it is. My dad's still around and plodding on. And I loved science at school. I inadvertently was told years later that I had an entrepreneurial streak, but I didn't realize what that was. And this was highlighted to me. We did a bit of traveling with scouts. Our scout troop was not like your typical scout troop. The only badges we had were like 1,000 nights camping. We had no other badges. And we went all over Europe. We went to Thailand, went all over the place. And it was on the way back. This is a really vivid memory for me. On the way back from Thailand, my scout leader was like, "Oh yeah, you're very entrepreneurial with what you get up to." And I'd bought a bunch of stuff in Thailand to just resell to my friends while I was home. And that's what brought up the conversation. But then the scout leader, his name is Alan, he brought up a bunch of situations where I'd been entrepreneurial in the past as well. I was buying a bunch of yo-yos on the market when yo-yos was a trend, when that was cool, when I was probably like 14, 15, again, selling them at school. And I hadn't twigged that was a career, because even though my dad ran a business, it was the business was created essentially, it was his job but outsourced. Sure. I didn't understand that you could, and this is really, I wish this was taught in schools. I wish this was communicated earlier on, especially in the UK. In the US, you've got a bit more of a entrepreneurial mindset in general, but in the UK, it's seen as risky. It's seen as people don't support you until you've made it in the UK. There's a bunch of cultural elements to all of this. But it was that moment then I realized that, you can create something, add some value to a process, a system, a product, an individual, and they will happily pay you for that return. So I went to university, loved chemistry, worst chemistry student of all time, failed the first year, and then recovered slightly, did well in my dissertation, which was a computational chemistry dissertation, was published in the journal Computational Chemistry. And from there, the only role from that was a sales role with something to do with chemistry, because I couldn't be in a lab. I needed to be out talking to people. I needed to be doing something. And at that point, I very well understood the value of having cash. The idea of sales where you put in the sweat and you generate cash on the back of that, which is different to most jobs, seemed to me, I realized that in that moment, that was a real opportunity. So that led me to my first chemical sales role, got sacked from that within the first 6 months. I missed a decimal place out. I put a decimal place in the wrong place on a invoice, and they honoured it. So I sold GlaxoSmithKline £50,000 worth of platinum for £5,000.
Ouch.
So that was that was me politely out the door, within that probationary period of my first sales role. Then I got into medical device sales, loved it, and that is when I spent me as a individual contributor, bag holding salesperson. That was where I spent my career, working for the 2 best companies in that space.
Love it. It's funny, man. You and I got a very similar background, like, and beliefs as far as like the ultra elite. Like, I've never professed to, the guy who did free climb, the guy who climbed the I don't know if you saw the document, right? Yep. So I remember seeing him at this, Drift did their, sales, or no, it was like their conference or whatever, and they had him as their motivational speaker. And there's a fine line of motivational speakers. Like, sometimes like, oh man, yeah, I can go conquer the world, but other times it's demotivating because you see how much effort they put in and how much they dedicated to be the best at what they do. And I looked at him after he tells the story and I'm like, there is nothing in my life, I mean, outside of my daughter, there is literally nothing in my life that I would ever dedicate that much of time and effort into. So it was demotivating to me because I'm like, I'm never going to be that fucking guy. Like, I look to the normal people that kind of rose through, and I've always said, like, I'm slightly above average at a lot of things. You know what I mean? I'm not great at anything, but I'm slightly above average against a lot of things. And I do believe that if you do it, right and well, you can make a great living. You just might not be the elite of the elite. And to your point, I've been searching on this podcast quite a bit of asking people who have done that, like, do you need to face trauma and true diversity to have grit? And I'd love your perspective on this. I don't think you need trauma to develop grit, but I think you need trauma to maybe, kickstart your ability to really be driven to be the best in a lot of ways, like really bad rock bottom type of shit, because I've seen it too often. But I don't think you need to expose to, not major trauma to develop grit. What are your thoughts on the grit factor of perseverance and those type of things, and how that's helped shape you?
I think there are two people that end up at the top of the food chain with this kind of thing. Some people, like, I'm sure if Alex was here, there's a more polite way of describing this. So I'm just going to say what is in my head. He seems slightly broken. Like, watching Free Solo, and not to say that someone who, I was just going to say, he seems slightly autistic. Not that someone who's autistic is broken. Obviously that's not what I'm saying, but which is why I'm being careful with my words here. But even the way that he communicates with his girlfriend in the Free Solo show, and I know a bunch of adventure photographers who spent time with him and have done work in the field with him, and he's just a psychopath. He seems very lovely and very nice. Yeah. He's a psychopath. So and he's an outlier, might be another way of looking at it, right? He is clearly wired differently. Was he dropped on his head as a child? Maybe. Did he go through some trauma? Maybe. Maybe he's just wired differently, which is great, right? Because you need those kind of people. And I find him incredibly inspiring. I don't want to be climbing El Capitan with no rope. I don't want to be, I used to do a lot of bouldering and a little bit of lead climbing. I don't want to be doing any of that with no rope because I don't have that gene in me, or it's inert, it's not turned on, where I'm willing to risk my life to be on a North Face advert, to be on the front of a climbing magazine, to do something that no one else has done. Now, he might say that you and I have just not found our thing yet. And I think that is a fair comment as well. Maybe something will happen to one of us. Maybe we'll see something. Maybe, for the past 12 months, I've been absolutely just enamored with landscape photography, and mountain photography in particular. I've wrapped up a bunch of work this year and turned down hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of business so that I can go and sit on a mountain in the cold and take some pictures of stuff that doesn't really, and it only goes on the wall in here in the house downstairs, in the hall downstairs. Nobody cares about it. I think it's pretty good. I've got a photography coach who thinks for 1 year in, I'm doing exceptionally well, but nobody cares, other than myself. So maybe there's a thread there that in 10 years you could become more savage on those routes. But if we translate all this back to sales, you don't need to be an outlier to make hundreds of thousands, if not, skirting $1 million a year in sales. You need process, you need grit, which I think is slightly different to being a psychopath.
Yes.
The grit element of being able to bum in seat when you don't want to do something and have difficult conversations with people when they crop up, and be able to persevere. I think that's a learnable skill as opposed to something that you have to be born with, or you have to have trauma to ignite it within you. So in the context of sales, or the kind of my rhetoric of the 1% in outliers is slightly different. But yeah, in the grand scheme of things, and just to kind of emphasize the point, I interviewed an astronaut on my podcast,
Yeah.
Super intelligent, doctor. Then he became a fighter pilot in the Navy, I think. Then he became an astronaut, a test pilot after that, then an astronaut. I said to him, I was like, you sit on literally an explosion that fires you away from the planet that you were evolved to be on.
Yep.
And the success rate is not 100%. People obviously die somewhat regularly. If there was more space flight, there'd be a lot more deaths and it'd be a lot more public. Because it happens relatively rarely, the number of rockets being sent up, the numbers are kind of dumbed down slightly. And he said, yes, but I trust the process and I trust the team behind it. So he, absolute outlier, 1%, clearly a psychopath to sit on a rocket and be fired up into space. And he spent a lot of time on the International Space Station. He communicated it from he took what would make outside looking in look like a psychopath, and he dumbed that down in that NASA have the best scientists, got the best support. If anyone's going to have success in this, it's going to be me. And so he could put his belief in the team and the process, which then I said to him, I was like, why can you do that and not be nervous when people are nervous about picking up the phone and doing a cold call? And he just literally sat back in his chair and started laughing. So that was the point of the tale of my podcast when I chatted to him about it, of drilling down of what is scary and what isn't. But yeah,
it's all relative.
We're kind of going. I'm going around in circles a little bit here, but yeah, it's kind of complicated, and it depends what context you're talking about outliers and 1% within.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's all relative, right? Like when you do take a step back and you realize, like, getting hung up on a cold call is, in context, it really isn't that big of a deal. But if you look at it as a learning experience and a growth mindset, that type of thing, you can start to get through it. And that's why I think a lot of people, for instance, even on a small tactical standpoint, they look right now, cold calling is absolutely brutal. Nobody picks up the phone. Why am I even doing this? And I'm like, you're not doing it for the outcome. You're doing it for the process. You're doing it to learn what it takes to get through and have minute conversations with people to earn the right to have a deeper conversation. You're doing it because you're learning how to articulate a message in a way that resonates with people in a short period of time. You're doing it to see if you can just fucking do it and get through the gauntlet of what sales is, which is actually going to lead me to my next, topic or point here with you is, I'm curious from your perspective on we're going to talk about what you've seen as far as what's changed in sales a lot, but with AI and all the stuff that's happening right now, obviously we've gotten away from fundamentals in quite a bit when it comes to sales. I've actually, my keynote these days is Age of the Agile Sales Org, and I'm saying that between 2010 and 2022, I'm deeming as the golden age of sales. Because we got away with some crazy ass shit, especially in tech, blasting out template emails, generic demos, discounts off there, right? And we lost sight of these fundamentals. Now, the predictable revenue model was a way when Salesforce came out with that to segment the roles and actually grow a sales team, right? So you could kind of, instead of being a full cycle, which is what I grew up in, you start with the inbound, then you do the outbound, then you move to sales. So it actually, when done right, it's good for an organization because it helps build a sales rep's skills at every level. I've never thought it was a customer-centric approach in any way, shape, or form, but that's a different topic. Now, we're automating so much of that front end of the sales process and moving back to, in a lot of ways, full cycle, or even skipping sales altogether and going to customer success or engineers, that type of thing. So I'm curious from your perspective where the future sales reps are going to come from if they don't graduate through the process of, making cold calls for the first 2 to 5 years of their career, then getting given a big book of business and that type of stuff. Like, where do you think we're going to develop the true sales reps of the future? Or how are they going to develop?
Well, hopefully the process that they're developing of right now stops and the market just doesn't accept the bullshit anymore, and there's almost a fresh start back to the fundamentals. Funny, as before you said it, I wrote down the word fundamentals on the pad of paper in front of me. That is the thing. We're doing all kinds of fancy automation. You probably have your finger on the pulse with the companies you work with on the automation and the AI side of things more than me. I've not seen any automation or AI that works. I will flat out say that. I've tried. I don't have any sponsors on my podcast or at sales.com anymore. because I had to sack them all because none of it worked. It was all bullshit, and I was sick of talking about them all. And which is, for me, it was probably about $500,000 in revenue that I just dropped over the course of 2 or 3 weekends of me going, I don't want to talk about this stuff when I know fundamentally that, sure, in a perfect world, some of this would work. But in the real world, people are automating shit that doesn't work in the first place. So they're trying to go from a 1% meeting booking rate on a cold outreach and scale it to 10,000 emails a week, as opposed to go from 1% to 10%, where they're not actually pissing off half the total addressable market as they go across that point. At some point, that'll switch. There will absolutely be an outbound agent, chatbot, call tool that will work for 12, 18 months. And then people will be sick of that because everyone will be pestered on it. And there'll be some legislation comes in that stops people spamming. Because when you're spamming at the rate of a human, the market can kind of keep up and tools can be put in place. When you spam at the rate of AI and CPU cycles, the legislation will then just come in to resolve it because the whole economy will just wind down to phones ringing off the hook 24/7.
They've already done that here in the States. So the FCC already put in some rules against AI robodials. Now that's for U.S. companies, unfortunately. It doesn't mean that, other countries can't call into us using that technology. So thankfully that's being put in place, but I think it's still curious to me. I even wonder what the future skills need to be as a sales rep. I mean, business acumen, conversational intelligence, and curiosity, I think, but those are very subjective in a lot of ways. So I think with the growth of a sales professional, and I think some fundamentals not even being necessary in some cases based on where we're going. What do you think the skills are necessary to train on, if you will, moving forward? And what does that look like? Like, what in your vision, if you were to say, okay, I see the trajectory based on all the conversations you've had here, what do you think the sales rep looks like in the future? And what's their role in the sales process, or in the buying process? Because I forget about the sales process. I think the sales process is
That's what I was going to say. You took the words out of my mouth. The shtick is, how do we help the buyer make a decision one way or another? As soon as you recalibrate your entire process around that, salespeople become useful. They're actually a tool that a buyer wants to leverage to help solve complex problems. And I was waiting to jump on that as soon as you finished your question, and you took the shine away from me, John. But that's all it is. Salespeople feel less gross, salesy. They have less of the ick because all you're doing is helping that prospect move to the next step of their buyer's journey. If they're not a good fit, no worries. And if that's a pressure for you as a salesperson, you've not got enough pipeline. If you've got enough pipeline and you work for a company that doesn't sell a shit product, you work for a company that people want to work with. Even if they don't know who you are yet, when you have those conversations, there is some level of excitement there, which isn't a trick. It's not it's not a hack. It's not some bullshit that some jumped up influencer on LinkedIn tells you, say these 3 magic words in this innovative way and someone's going to book a meeting with you. None of that bullshit. When you can communicate, I help this person solve this problem in this way, you share that via outbound in some way, typically to book a meeting, then you have a conversation with the person that's like, oh yeah, that is actually a problem. How do I resolve this? You might. And then you go back and forth and essentially consult with them, and you wrap up the call with, is this the next step? Would it make sense to do this? And they say yes. So if they say no, you go, okay, well, what would be the next step? Once we frame up a conversation like that of we're just helping that person make a decision, then sales becomes a useful tool in the economy again.
So this is interesting because I literally just had this conversation last night, and it was fascinating. So usually when I get in an Uber, I just kind of put my earbuds in, I'm checking emails, whatever it is. But for whatever reason, last night I was going out to dinner. I was like, fuck it, let's engage in a conversation. And this kid who picked me up, he eventually, as we got down the road a little bit, he goes, hey, I noticed there's a lot of solar power, solar on a lot of the houses in your neighborhood. And I just kind of went into it. I was like, yeah, we got it first. And then it's kind of like a ripple effect, and everybody else started doing it, and it makes sense, the incentives. And I just kind of went off on like our decision. And he's like, oh yeah, I work for, and he said a solar company. And I was like, oh, great. And I started going into like how door-to-door sales is like the most purest form of sales. And if you're good at that, like, fucking God bless you. You know what I mean? Because you get literally doors slammed in your face, right? And the conversation evolved to his frustration about how the company that he works for celebrates the douchey sales reps and the ones who are using all these techniques to convince people to do, and sometimes not even techniques. Like sometimes he's like bold-faced lying to them, right? And he's like, and it's frustrating because my company celebrates that every month, you know, the month, and I'm trying to do it the right way. I'm super transparent. I tell people what the margins are and how I'm getting paid, right? And it's been working for me, but I'm never on top of the leaderboard. And this is where I'm going with this conversation. Like sometimes the question I have is, do the means justify the ends, in the sense that if you are selling something like solar actually helps a lot of people, like it does reduce their bills, it does help them, you know, all this other stuff, besides the environmental component of it, obviously. So if you believe that something is good ultimately for the majority of people that they might not know, but you're using these sleazy techniques to get them to do it, I think that's how those type of sales reps sleep at night, because they're like, look, yeah, whatever, but it's going to help them in the long run. So I don't give a shit. Whatever I got to say to get them to do it, it's going to do it. I make money. They're ultimately happy. Who cares? I personally can't sleep at night with that approach. And this kid couldn't either. And so I guess from your perspective, going back to the buying process and helping people solve problems, if you know your solution is going to solve a problem for the most part, for the most people, do the ends justify the means to get there?
I'm here to help people make a bunch of money. I love nothing more than I jump on a group coaching call. It happened this morning. Someone just got a $100,000 bonus this quarter.
I just
killing it. Absolutely killing it. But if someone feels uncomfortable in the role, they're going to feel more comfortable and congruent in a different role where that isn't the situation that they find themselves in, and they're going to have more success there. So I don't believe that the ends justify the means. I'm also in a very privileged position where paid off my mortgage, a bunch of money in the bank, you know, run a successful business, blah, 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 started to a business, blah, blah, blah. So it's very easy for me to say that. If 10 years ago, when I quit my sales role, started the podcast and started trying to build a business, absolutely skipped. So it would be unfair of me to come along on my high horse and dictate that, yes, you should only do things when it's right for the customer, you know, etc. Other than, obviously, it should be somewhat moral, ethical, and legal what you're doing. So with that context in place, I think the real question is, that lad, if he's driving Uber and doing a sales role, should just get into a B2B sales role where his customers actually want to communicate with him as an adult. And he doesn't need to do all the bullshit. And he will have way more success and make a bunch more money and probably work less hours and less faffing around.
Well, let me put a comparison here for you. Let's go to what you and I do, or, you know, from a sales training and that type of thing. You know, we have the Grant Cardones of the world, who is one of my least favorite people, quite frankly. I think he represents everything that's bad about selling, but I don't believe he thinks that. I do believe that he thinks that what he is teaching is helping sales reps make a bunch of money, like you said. And so therefore he's super proud of what he's doing, because these reps are taking and he's seeing people do $100,000 months and those type of things. I look at, and that guy is, I mean, he's not 10x me. He's 1,000x me. He's 10,000x me. And I've been chugging away my entire career in B2B sales, trying to do it, in my opinion, the right way, but I'm nowhere near. And so I've always wondered, and I actually asked Guy Kawasaki this when he was on the podcast recently, do you have to be a raging asshole to reach the pinnacle of perceived success? Not, you know, we all define success in different ways, but you think of all these different people like Elon and all these different people who are just raging assholes, but yet they've reached this like status level. So I don't think the answer is yes, but I do question the long slog of doing it right versus skipping steps to make your millions.
Depends what the goal is, right? I do not care if... So I'm not religious atheist. I die, just a pile of dirt in the ground. That's it. Boo-hoo for people around me. And then they'll forget it. A generation later, no one knows who I was anyway. Mm-hmm. My book is probably still like on someone's shelf somewhere, still unread. So that is what it is, right? So if you have a nihilistic view on the world and you think that no one else, it doesn't really matter for anyone else, then maybe you do go down that route and you make a bunch of money and you buy a yacht and good for you. For me, that's not how I want to live day to day. And so I can't in good conscience encourage someone else to go down that route. But have I cut corners to make money? Probably not consciously. Maybe I could have, maybe if I could look back or rewind time, I would do things differently. But unless you're conscious of that in that moment, it's very difficult to do so. So yeah, is what you're asking me, is there a glass ceiling for trainers who don't want to be a dickhead? Is that the question?
Effectively. Or anybody, quite frankly. You know what I mean? Like in business, right?
So I don't think that's the case, right? So if you look at someone like Seth Godin, he seems like a really cool dude. He seems like he's making an absolute shitload of money. He's run loads of businesses. I find his books really useful from a conceptual standpoint, not very practical, but from a mind-opening standpoint. I think it's really cool. You look at
Richard Branson, right?
Richard Branson, Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yep.
There is probably just as many people who have done it, quote unquote, from your words, the right way, versus people that you consider have done it the wrong way. I think you've also got to consider the fact that Grant Cardone's audience from a sales training perspective, which he just left behind essentially now, right? It's just been demolished by a bunch of other sales trainers. Like Andy Elliott has just wiped out a bunch of his marketplace over the past few years. And Andy seems like, I've never spoken to Andy, he seems like a good dude, but he's down this similar kind of route of making grown men take their shirts off and call them fat in front of other people, which like is kind of depending on you. If you did it to me, it would be hilarious. I would be like, okay, maybe getting in better shape would be motivational. To do it to the wrong person, obviously you could really upset them. But yeah, I don't think there's a glass ceiling to any of that. I think people also resonate with specific personalities. So I am a lot more introverted than I am extroverted. I jump on a podcast like this, I have to turn on the extrovertedness. I have to turn on that. I've probably been shouting the whole episode. I have to turn that on. Usually I'm a bit more like quiet as I speak. So all that gets turned on. Whereas I think Grant Cardone is probably just Grant Cardone 9 times 10. And I know I've seen content that you've, comments you've had about him over the years. I email him once a year. He emails me back with a bit of business advice, and he's always been very cordial with me. The next level from that is like the Jordan Belforts, who I interviewed on my podcast, and I couldn't publish the episode because he's just, I'm being conscious of my language again, but it was not an episode that my audience, they would find it hilarious. It is still on the computer. It may be snipped up and published at some point.
I would love to see that.
They would not have got value from it. Put it that way.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to see that conversation. Because actually, one of my favorite ones is, this is where I actually give Jordan Belfort a little bit more credit than Grant, because I don't know if you saw the interview between those two, and Grant was like, yeah, zero interest is still interest. And Jordan's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that makes no sense. And so I was like, for a shining moment, I was like, oh, Jordan, like you kind of get it. but after that, I kept listening.
You've also considered those two are marketing machines. I'm not doing, I don't know about yourself, John, but I'm not doing what they're doing from a marketing perspective.
Not even close.
I just don't give a shit. Yeah. I'll make a bunch of money this year. That's more money than what I can spend reasonably. Because as I said earlier on, my expensive tastes are driving to Scotland with my dog and going up a big hill. You know what I mean? As sad as that sounds.
No, sounds great to me.
There's tens of thousands of pounds worth of camera gear all over the place. Like, as we speak, just thrown across the room as we sit in. But other than that, so it depends on your aspirations, it depends on your goals. I think you can win big in business, in training, in sales by doing things the right way. I don't think that there is you shortcut the process, but for everyone, Grant Cardone, who's had massive success, as I said, he offers me useful business advice every now and again. We perhaps have not dissimilar, but slightly different an angle on the take on him as, and I don't know him as a person. Maybe he's great as a person, as a father, whatever it is. But for everyone Grant Cardone, there is 40,000 red-faced, angry sales managers driving around in a second-hand red BMW who are just pissed off all the time because it hasn't worked out for them.
That's the truth. So let's talk about what to pay attention to then, right? Because there's so much noise. And with the context of helping the buyer buy versus selling, right? And because I think there's a lot of people who are getting into sales, who are in sales, and they just don't know who or what to pay attention to anymore. Because, then let's bring it to LinkedIn. There's so much noise on LinkedIn right now from people who were super successful, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago, when I'm positioning. Yeah, but again, it was more circumstance in the sense that they were at the company that was a rocket ship, and they used whatever tactics at that time were effective, documented them, and now are telling people to use, hey, I was the best rep here, so you should pay attention to me. And I look at those people and I'm like, okay, are you selling in today's environment? Because today's environment is drastically different than when interest rates were 2-3%. Okay. And I think, and this is, I found this out recently, by the way, Challenger sale.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jolt Effect, the new book, right? So Jolt Effect, which I'm a huge fan of, to your point, like Seth Godin conceptually, right? It's indecision, no decision, all this other stuff, and they dove into it. However they solve that problem, Jolt, that's whatever. But it really highlighted, that is what's happening right now. But the thing is that Challenger sale, the reason the Jolt Effect came to fruition is because Challenger was looking at their own numbers, using their own techniques, and they saw like an 85% drop in conversion ratios in this market using Challenger sale techniques. And so they were like, we need to spin off another thing to talk about this. And so, but Challenger sales people, I'm guessing they're probably still buying 5,000 to 10,000 books a month on that thing on Amazon, right? So people are still consuming Challenger sale content and probably misapplying it in a lot of ways and not seeing the results. So how do you know what to pay attention? A, what's changed from your perspective, especially recently? And B, what should reps be paying attention to at this point so that they don't go down a path that is leading them in a direction that is not going to help the buyer buy?
What's changed is a 4-hour conversation that I will give the highlights for, right? And it almost doesn't matter. It's almost irrelevant when we get on to what to pay attention to and how to improve your own performance. What's changed is constantly in flux. Another 4 years from now, it'll be something else. And inevitably, there's going to be some AI tool that's going to come along and genuinely disrupt things to a much deeper level than the generative AI that we have right now. So that is a constant flux. That is something that you should try and pay attention to. But when you sell with fundamentals, that then becomes less relevant. So what has changed, and you know this better than me, and you can articulate this far better than me. I've been worked in the Silicon Valley and the SaaS market, and you mentioned interest rates earlier on. People have the perception that there is less money. There is still tons of money about. It's just how it is being spent is being looked at a much deeper level, and people aren't buying crap like what they used to.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. So obviously I'm simplified
or unnecessary. Let's put it this way: if it's not crap, unnecessary things.
Just crap. There's just crap. You look at the average company sales stack; they're spending $3,000 per rep a month on crap, and they won't spend £1,500 a month on training. It's crazy.
Yeah,
it is absolutely crazy because a tool can be articulated in this tool will help you this way, solve this problem in this way. And that's the magic bullet. That's sexy. That's exciting. To come in and to rewire some people's brains. Maybe some of the team have zero personal accountability. They've got a good process, but they won't actually put it in place. Maybe some people like me need to be able to learn to turn on a level of extrovertedness to have more adult conversations on a call and come across more assertively. That is more nuanced. That is more to program the human is very difficult to do via an app that is installed and is £35 a month per seat, right?
Changing behavior is one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah.
Period.
And when you do it, it's potentially the most impactful. If you ask a CEO what would be more impactful for them, some kind of coach, mentor, trainer versus a new tool that helps them do X, Y, Z, they're going to want to work on themselves 9 times out of 10. And so that can be scaled down to, maybe not Jackie in HR who just answers emails all day. Who cares? Maybe she can be automated by AI and a tool and an app. But for a salesperson, especially in the complex sales environment where the buyer's journey is complex and there are nuances to it, then working on the person is the most important thing. So what's changed is, as you kind of alluded to, businesses feel like they have no cash. They feel like there is a recession. Obviously the data supports that there's been a bunch of recessions over the past 3-4 years. As much as every government on the planet is trying to avoid using that word, maybe the flow of money is being constricted, but there's still a ton of money moving through that pipe. So what we need to do is go back to the fundamentals and accurately articulate what would, first off, be in a job where making things easier for yourself, be in a job, be in a role, sell a product that people actually want and need and care for.
And you believe in. Yep.
You could be the world's greatest salesperson, but if you're selling crap that no one actually cares about, there's no value in it being implemented, then you're just making your life hard for yourself. So this is why I did medical advice sales. I only ever worked for the best companies in the space. One, Olympus Chemed owned 49% of the market. The other, Karl Storz, owned 49% of the market. And there was a bunch of smaller American companies in the middle battling over the scraps. So I knew that I would walk up to an operating room in the UK, flash my Storz badge or my Olympus badge, just walk in, which absolutely should not happen. You shouldn't be able to get access like that. But that was the power of the brands that I was working for. So step one is work for a company that, even if it's a startup, it's going to have the potential that when you communicate your message, your value proposition, people want to go, what you want is the response of, I don't really want to speak to Will today. I really don't get time to speak to Will. I'm not doing the due diligence that I need to do for my job unless I just jump on a quick call. So that makes the meeting booking process a lot easier and smoother. Then you can diagnose their issues. Then you can help them, if appropriate, move down the buyer's journey. But the change is that there's a perception, rightfully and wrongfully, depending on your mindset of all of this and how much accountability you want to take for your own success. But there's at least a perception, I think it's fair to say, that there's a constriction in the spending of small, medium, and the enterprise. Who you should pay attention to is less relevant now than it ever has been, because there's just so much trash out there that's been regurgitated. And I see people rip off which I don't care about, because it's always better to be the source, right? I see people rip off my content all the time, just copy and paste, whether it's be the structure. I'm sure you've been in business longer than me. You've had a generation of all this longer than what I have. I've been in business kind of 9-10 years at this point with Self.com. You're running way beyond that, right?
I'm coming up on 48. So yeah, 28, 27, 6 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've had 2 generations of salespeople come through, having been trained by you, who are now regurgitating your stuff out of context on LinkedIn. So the goal with the self-improvement is to have a series of numbers, benchmarks, something concrete that you're moving towards. And then it doesn't matter what I say or what, for the audience, it doesn't matter what John says. It's, I try this, it moves me closer or further away from the benchmark that I'm aiming for. If it moves you closer, then you do more of it. If it moves you further away, you do less of it. So I think I don't think there's any real secrets in the sales space. There are hacks. You can scrape this database in this way for the next month before that loophole gets closed. Some of that can be useful. But if you want to have long-term success in B2B sales, complex B2B sales, it's understanding the fundamentals of who is your ideal customer persona. What platform do they want to be communicated on? There's no point trying to prospect a farmer on LinkedIn when they're out on the tractor all day.
Right.
You probably, if you call them, they're probably happy to have a chat with you.
Yep.
And, there's obviously a stupid, not necessarily a stupid example, but a cliche example there. But farmers will spend £500,000 on farm gear, and maybe all you've got to do is call them, and they're probably happy to come and play with some new toys and see what you've got anyway. So if you to hide on LinkedIn, like what a lot of salespeople want to do right now, you've got to go to the market and the platform. You've got to go to the platform where the market is at. Then it's more fundamentals like, don't send a message if it's not going to the right person with the right message at the right time. You should use the acid test of, if I received this message, would I give a shit? And if you wouldn't give a shit, then you probably shouldn't send it. there's a series of kind of checks and balances that you can do across your outreach, across the entirety of the sales process. Micro closing, asking the question, would it make sense to do this? If the answer is yes, fantastic. Next step of the process. If they say no, you go, okay, well, what would it make sense to do? Allow them to coach you on how to get to that next step. The fundamentals like that, if you learn and implement them, it doesn't matter what changes happen at a kind of a macro level, because business is just business. It's just exchanging value on different platforms in different currencies, in different ways. And that is exchanged via communicating these kind of simple points.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's the key, right? Is just continuously trying new approaches and new techniques. And much to my dismay or disdain, a lot of the stuff that I see on LinkedIn that I know doesn't really have any context, but is a reasonable tip in the right scenario. Maybe that kid who's reading that uses that and it does work for them, whether there is context to it or not, or depth to it or not, whether it's a regurgitated thing, but it helps. So I think what you and I are both fans of, and I want to get into some of these that you've created, is these frameworks that allow reps to test and try different approaches within the framework without it being a script. So one of your books is Selling Made Simple, right? Which is, I think, 15 proven step-by-step frameworks to succeed in sales, or whatever that tagline is. When you talk about 15 proven frameworks, are these frameworks at the various stages of the sales process, or are these frameworks for 15 different frameworks for the sales process in general? And tell me which one kind of you're a fan of these days, that you would lean into the most right now.
So the book is set up to help you understand. It's set up to help you get in front of buyers, to explain the value, and then to close a deal. The first step of all of that being to understand your marketplace. So unless you know who your ideal customer persona is, hopefully you can go to your sales leadership. They've done all this research and they will tell you exactly who it is. 9 times out of 10, they can't tell you jack shit. And so you got to do it yourself. So your first step is to understand who your buyer is. Go back through the CRM. If there's been someone on your patch previously, who is the person who buys the biggest deals, the quickest, the easiest, with the less faffing around? That is the person you want to spend more time with. If you don't have that data, then you start with a broader audience. And as they go through your funnel, to use this as a kind of a visual, as they go through what we'd call a traditional sales funnel, but as they go through it, the people that come out the other end, we just put more of them back in. And then we iterate again, and then we put more of them back in. We get more granular as we go through that cycle. And that's a month, if you can, depending on how many meetings you can book, obviously. But that could be a month of iteration of however you describe it, a month of iteration to then come up with a ICP that is valid in the marketplace, that then that for every 100 of those people that you outreach to, you're going to book 10 meetings on the back of it. And once you've done that for one segment of the market, you might do it for another sliver and another sliver, until you get to the point where you book enough meetings a quarter to satisfy all the rest of the goals. So the book and all my training is based upon that principle of understand the market, get in front of your buyers, explain the value, and close the deal. And each framework helps you with one step of that. So the second framework in the book is building the value proposition. So the end goal of the framework is, I help this person solve this problem in this way. Hopefully the way is somewhat interesting or exciting. Doesn't have to be. If you're selling HR software to HR folks, it's probably not very sexy. But if you can add some kind of nuance to it, some kind of twist to it, which there is almost certainly a way to go about doing that, obviously it increases the curiosity that's built within all the outreach and the conversations that you're going to have. So the framework itself will look at who are your buyers, what are their jobs, what are their pains, and we essentially go across a diagram that we have in the book that you can draw in that leads to the products that you have, the solutions that they offer, and then the desires of the buyer, and you tie them all together into what is the one thing. This is all I want for people in the prospecting. What is the one thing that when you share it with a potential customer, they go, oh, I've got to jump on a quick call with them. That is it. We're not trying to sell them anything. We're trying to convince them of anything. We're not trying to pitch them anything. It's just, what's that one open loop of curiosity where they can only solve the loop, get to the final bit of the payoff of the curiosity loop by jumping on a quick call with us. And it's not deceitful. There's no trickery. It is genuinely, an email from Warren Buffett going, hey, can you jump on a quick call? I might have something to share. You're like, hell yeah, I'll jump on a quick call. It's that, but obviously we're not Warren Buffett, so we need to increase curiosity. We need to increase curiosity in other ways. So that's how the frameworks work, and that's kind of as we go through buyer's journey, value proposition, build new prospecting lists, sales cadences, cold emails, all the way to upsells, demos, follow up, closing, referrals. That's how it's all structured.
So on the other one, and to kind of finish on this note, if you were to choose, because you have another book, I think it's 18 sales skills and personality traits. If you were to choose one skill for a sales rep to focus on right now, like with where we are, with context of where we are in the marketplace and everything else, what would you suggest that one skill being?
It would be from the second book. So the first book is the sales process. If you follow that and you run through it, and it's free, it's on the website over at sales.com, just download it, it's there. If you follow that, you're going to have a baseline, almost inevitably, you're going to have a baseline level of success. You might not be the top performer. There are other variables that lead to that, right? But you're going to, and as long as your product isn't complete, as long as someone else in your organization is having success, you're going to have some success. The second book is built upon a sales assessment that we put together 4 years ago. And it's constantly been iterated upon, it's constantly been refined. Well, about 40,000 people have been through it now. We started off with 100, and I think it was 135 potential traits of high performance. And on the intro to the assessment, again, the assessment is free on the website. You check it out at sales.com. It asks you your base salary, your OT, and what you achieved last year. So we can start to dissect which traits are kind of affiliated with people who have success and people who are not having success. And there are 15 that came out. One of them is just the ability to focus, just the ability to, I call it the caveman brain. Or it's known as in the chimp paradox. It could be the chimp brain, it could be the reptile brain, but essentially how to turn off that part of your brain that goes, I could just check my email, or I might just see what's going on Facebook, or I got a real, you don't realize this, but this is what the brain's doing. I got a real dopamine spike when I went on LinkedIn, and there was no notifications, and there was no notifications, and now there's a notification because someone I followed that I like on LinkedIn made a post, I left a comment, and they've responded to it. So the ability, so I'm an upper end of millennial, I'm 38, but the ability for everyone my age and younger just to be able to sit there and do the sodding work for a block of 2 hours, that is a differentiator. If you can do that, you will outcompete all your peers, even if you're shit at sales, just because you'll have done more of most of the right stuff. So that for me is the big one. And that's when people come into our training program, that is one of the first things that I try and decipher. We get the assessment, I can see the results in our back end to see where they are with things. But that is the first thing that I like to, the process you can learn, it's just tick the boxes, do that kind of stuff. Exactly. But from a mindset perspective, from a personality trait perspective, that's the one thing that once you help someone get over that hurdle of being just constantly distracted, they then have a massive competitive advantage. And that's only going to become a larger competitive advantage over time.
Yeah, I agree. I was introduced to that way back when with Think and Grow Rich, right? No, I'm sorry, not Think and Grow, 4-Hour Work Week, where it was like, and I mean, he took it to the extreme, but when he was like, look, I got so, buried with all the different things that I was doing. I put an autoresponder on my email that I respond to emails and calls twice a day, once at 10 o'clock in the morning, once at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. If you need before or after that, call my cell phone. Nobody called his cell phone. And then, he went all the way to 4 hours. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's a little extreme, but it proves the point of focus and how much more efficient you can be, because the brain doesn't actually, the book myth of multitasking, right? Where the brain actually doesn't multitask. It just does task switching and it loses time between each one of those. So therefore, the more shit you do, the less focused you can be. So I think that's a good one mainly because of all the distractions that are coming at us now with the phone and the emails and the alerts and all these different things. It's amazing from a psychology standpoint for me when I go on vacations. The one thing that gave me peace because I would always grab my phone and I would see the overdue notifications. Fuck, there's 400 emails in my inbox right now. I got to at least go in and clean some of that shit up before I get home. Just turning off the alerts, literally just turning off alerts on all apps. My brain just felt so free that I was able to actually take a vacation, and I was actually able to enjoy myself and not have anxiety every time I picked up my phone. So Those are some good ones. I like it, man.
And look, I don't have email on my phone.
No, you don't.
So two things, right? I don't have email on my phone, and nobody has my number. Literally nobody. So I've had a bounty on, if you cold call me, I'll give you $1,000. No questions asked. Right? This has been going for 10 years. I've had the same number for 10 years. Now, at this point, someone will be able to find my number on, there'll be an invoice somewhere or something with it on. But still, to this day, nobody has managed to cold call me. I've had, on my podcast, all the CEOs of all the big data companies, and they've all tried to, like, in the middle of the podcast, make a big proclamation of, here's Will's data. And no one's got it right. It's always been trash data because it's just not out there. Yeah, so that's
awesome.
And that it still stands until the first person who does it, I'll begrudgingly give them the $1,000. Yeah, and that'll be the end of it. But yeah, you can't call me if you want to communicate with me. It's email. It's not on I don't have email on my phone, and so it'd be whenever I log in onto on the computer, which is probably once, twice a day, because nothing that I'm doing is that time critical. It's not that urgent.
So you just outlined my out of office reply. My out of office reply, and it has been for years, is thanks for your email. Since I'm not an emergency room doctor, I'm guessing your email can wait until I get back. Thank you very much, and don't forget to smell the roses. That's literally every time, and almost inevitably I get emails back from people being like, dude, thank you. You know what? It totally kind of get me to stop to realize that what is important and what isn't. Right, because we get caught in this, everything's important, and really almost none of it is at the end of the day.
Yep. So two things. My email response is autoresponder is similar. It's, hey, if this is important, if this is urgent, please call my number. Then in brackets, you definitely don't have my mobile number. I'll speak to you on this date. That's my auto-response.
Love it.
But then my wife is a geriatrician, a elderly medicine consultant here in the UK. She literally gets emails of, we need to speak to this family because we just had the cancer results. And this period of time, that we've got to communicate with them today because of this, right? Even she is told via the NHS in the UK that she shouldn't be checking her emails at night. She shouldn't have it on. She can't get access to it on her phone because it's all obviously secure and has to go through the VPN of the laptop that the NHS give her. But just salespeople are responding to stuff at like 11 o'clock at night to what they feel. What they say is, I'm getting it off my plate. I want to get that number down. But not really. It's a serotonin dopamine loop that's playing a game with you that you don't have to play. Just don't have it on your phone. Just put your phone the other end of the house. If just turn it off. It's literally irrelevant. The goal is book meetings, find people that you can help them. If they're a good fit, ask for the business. If they say no when you're panicking, your pipeline isn't big enough. You're shaking your head as I say that, John. It is it's simple to say, more difficult to implement. But at a fundamental, that is it.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. I'm a keep it simple, stupid guy. Like, don't overcomplicate this shit. Somebody has a problem, figure out what it is. If you got a solution that can solve it, have a conversation, ask some questions, be curious, call it a day. You know what I mean? Like, don't try to screw anybody over at the end of the day. Like, if you kind of follow those guidelines, you'll be pretty successful. And you have to be willing to put in the work too. So that's the part of the work ethic. There is no hack to work ethic, in my opinion. So awesome. Well, we could keep talking sales all day long, man. I'd love to dive into the other 18 sales skills and 15 other strategies, but in the interest of wrapping this up within the hour here, you said you got a bunch of free resources and you're just doing some cool shit. So talk to people where they can find out more information about you, what you're doing, and how you want people to contact you.
So forget about me. Everything that I do is available over at sales.com. Both books are there. The assessment is there. There's a free community there. Everything I know, and some of it's probably learned from you consciously and vicariously by the podcasts you've done with me, John. So I appreciate that, mate, over the years, and the bits of advice you've given me, training and business and other things. But everything is available on salesman.com. Head over there. If you need help in implementing any of it, we've got our academy program, but you'll know if you're a good fit for that. But for everyone else, it's all free. It's all there. Just go and grab it, gobble it up, and go and from the basis of our conversation, simplify the process and go make a shit ton of money and live a good life.
There you go, and help out as many people as you can along the way, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming back on, man. I really appreciate it. It was fun catching up. Let's make sure that we don't spend another 10 years before we have another conversation on this one, all right? Because who knows what the fuck's going to happen in 10 years. I can't even look 2 years out at this point. So let's try to make this a little bit more frequent if you don't mind.
Perfect. Cheers, John.
Awesome. Thanks. And everybody, hopefully you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And like I said, all the end of all these podcasts, go out there and make somebody smile today. Because no matter how bad your day is going or how bad you think it went, you go out and make somebody smile. You know you had a good day. And the world needs a lot more of that right now. So thank you all very much. And I'll see you on the other side. Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. With your support and our incredible guests, we're one of the top sales podcasts out there right now, and I can't thank you enough. Now, to keep the momentum going, it would mean the world to me if you could go and leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform and share some of your favorite episodes with your network. Also, I am super excited to be launching my new newsletter, where I'll be sharing everything I know and everything I'm learning along the way while I'm out there selling every day just like you. Go to jbarrows.com/newsletter to sign up today. Let's all level up and make this happen together.